China has created its own form of digital currency. Known as the digital yuan, the currency will be owned by the central bank. This is the first major economy to create its own digital currency. The digital yuan isn't like Bitcoin, which is not backed by a government or central bank. For more on this, let's bring in Emily Parker. She's the managing director of Coindesk, as well as the author of the book, Now I Know Who My Comrades Are. Emily, welcome. It's great to have you with us. So help us break this down. What is Beijing's end game in implementing this new digital currency? And will the U.S. be forced to follow suit?
Thank you so much for having me. So I think their end game is twofold. There's a domestic end game and there's an international end game. So domestically, this is on the most basic level, this is a way to get a lot more financial data from citizens, because this is, as you said, this is not like Bitcoin. This is backed by a central bank. So it will provide a lot of information on how citizens are spending money. So that's, one way. It could also increase efficiency in that sense. Internationally, it's a whole other ballgame. So there are definitely people out there who fear that this China's central bank digital currency is being used to challenge the supremacy of the US dollar, because the US dollar right now is the world's most powerful currency. It can be used for many different things, for example, sanctions. And having a Chinese central bank digital currency circulating all over the world could be one way of undermining the power of the US dollar.
And so do you believe then that if this digital currency becomes widespread internationally, the U.S. will have to create its own digital currency to compete?
You would think that, but that doesn't appear to be exactly what's happening. So the U.S. has a very different approach. So China is really racing ahead with the development of a digital currency, and they've been doing this for a while. The U.S. is taking a much more measured approach. You have, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that this was something that we had to proceed with very carefully and deliberately, and it would need congressional approval. So I think, yes, eventually we might have a digital dollar, but it's not going to happen at the same pace as China's. China is already way ahead, and I don't think the U.S. seems that bothered about that right now.
But you have said that this puts the U.S. dollar at risk, correct?
Yes, I mean, I think that it does. Of course, we don't know how this will actually play out, right? Because this is still China's currency. It's just a digital form of China's existing currency, which is non-convertible. So there are reasons why it might not have the same kind of internationalization that some people expect. But yes, I mean, I think there are many people out there who fear that this will threaten the US dollar status as the global reserve currency. And I think China itself has been pretty open about the fact that they are unhappy with the power that the U.S. wields in terms of sanctions, for example, and their digital currency is an attempt to fight against that.
So, Emily, what does this also mean in terms of Bitcoin? Because, as we pointed out, this digital currency is backed by the Chinese government, unlike Bitcoin, which is sort of this, currency that has no connection to any government or any central bank. How will this affect the future of Bitcoin?
That's a great question. And I think there are two schools of thought on this. So there are definitely people out there who say this is going to somehow replace Bitcoin or challenge Bitcoin. I actually hold the opposite view. I think this will, in some ways, this is an argument for Bitcoin, because this is the opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is decentralized, it is independent of banks, it is independent of governments, and it's not perfectly anonymous, but it's much more anonymous than a central bank digital currency. So I think in some ways this is actually a great argument for Bitcoin, because we are going to see now, the decline of cash with all of these central bank digital currencies. And I think people are going to be looking for more private forms of money and forms of money that are not controlled by government. So actually, the rise of central bank digital currencies could lead more people to embrace Bitcoin.
But Emily, clearly, China's move here means that it wants to keep a tighter grip on the way its citizens are spending money and what they're spending money on. So doesn't it follow that eventually world governments are going to say, hey, we don't like this Bitcoin thing that operates outside of any kind of, regulation. We're going to simply, clamp down and not allow it to be used?
Oh, governments are already saying that. So, I mean, I think governments, for some governments, Bitcoin is their worst nightmare, right? Because this is a currency that they cannot control, literally. But as we've seen governments all over the world already try to crack down on Bitcoin, and they haven't been particularly successful because of the way that Bitcoin is structured. Bitcoin is a decentralized currency. So, unless you're going to unplug your entire country from the internet, there really is no way to stop Bitcoin entirely. We have not seen any country successfully do that.
Very, very interesting comparing, the digital yuan to Bitcoin. This is a great conversation. Emily Parker, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.